and Torrent Company for giving me this opportunity to discuss one of the important topics, evidence-based management of irritable bowel syndrome. I have discussed this topic earlier also, but subsequently it was realized that many people have not attended, and that was the first time the same webinar was done. So we thought that we should be dealing with the management of IBS again. There are new drugs, evidence-based drugs in the management of IBS, which are there in the phase 3 trials which have been published, and hence this is very important aspect that it's a common problem in clinical practice. Number one, there are new drugs in the management of IBS, and there is a new hypothesis also. So it gives me pleasure to be associated with you for this lecture. Let us come to what is the prevalence and economic burden of IBS. Supposed to be the most common GI disorder affecting 10% of population globally. Average day of work in a year can range from 8.5 to 21.6 days, which is significant, and the economic loss in terms of US dollars ranges from $335 to $800, and annual expenditure in indirect or direct in USA, which accounts for about $20 billion for IBS, suggesting that it's a significant health-related problem. Now, there have been changes in the irritable bowel syndrome as far as the definition is concerned. Earlier was Manning criteria, where the importance was given more to altered bowels than abdominal pain. The Rome 3 criteria, the importance was given to abdominal discomfort associated with bowels. And now there is a Rome 4, a new definition of IBS proposed in 2016. What is irritable bowel syndrome? The importance is given to recurrent abdominal pain, which is very important, that it's a recurrent abdominal pain on an average at least 1 day per week in the last 3 months, and that abdominal pain should be associated with two of the following. Either it should be related to defecation, it should be related or associated with change in the frequency or consistency of these stools. So, by definition, you must understand that the patient should have a long-standing problem, preferably for the last 6 months. The onset of symptoms should be 3 months with at least 1 per week, and there should be correlation of abdominal pain with the bowels, either the change in frequency or the form of the stools. Now, we predominantly diagnose the IBS into a constipation and a diarrhea form, because this helps us in management of the patient. As you are aware with the Bristol stool chart, where you can see 1 and 2 is supposed to be the hard, very hard stools, which are like stones. So that is defined as constipation, and 6 and 7 are the loose stools, which are defined as diarrhea. So how do you define constipation IBS when out of 100% stool, more than 25% of these stools are Bristol 1 and 2? That should be defined as constipation, but the most important is less than 25% should be 6 and 7. Similarly, in diarrhea type of IBS, you should have more than 25% of the stool should be 6 and 7, and less than 25% stool should be 1 and 2. According to Asian definition, the stool form 3 is also considered as constipation type of Bristol stool form. Now, there is a new terminology which is proposed, that is the IBS symptom severity scale. This is mainly used for the research purpose. So, there is a scale which measures the abdominal pain, number of days, every 10 days, severity of abdominal distension, bowel habits, and interference with the quality of life. So, depending upon that, you can find whether the patient has mild, moderate, and severe symptoms. And then in research trial, this scale is frequently used, and anything more than 50 to 75 reduction is considered as response to treatment. Now, let us find out what are the changes from Rome 3 to Rome 4. In Rome 4, as against Rome 3, the term discomfort has been deleted and is replaced by abdominal pain. Because discomfort could mean anything in different language, and to the patients also it may be ambiguous. So they have replaced discomfort with abdominal pain. That's number one. Number two, rather than 3 days in a month, it has been said that it should be 1 day per week in the last 3 months. So 1 day per week is a change than a 3 days per month. And it is associated with two of the following. Earlier things mentioned that abdominal pain onset associated with change in frequency of stool and change in the form of stool. But the onset word is removed and it is associated, because sometimes the abdominal pain is increased rather than decreased by the in patients with irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea. So 3 things: discomfort removed, pain put, 3 days converted into 1 per week, and the onset word is removed, associated is there, and all these criteria should be there once in a week for 3 months and over with duration of 6 months duration. Most important thing is we should not have organic disease, though it's not mentioned in the definition. Irritable bowel syndrome is a functional disorder where there is no organic disease, but the patient has abdominal pain, altered bowels. Now, what are the subtypes? As I said, constipation, Bristol 1 and 2 more than 25%, and 6 and 7 less than 25% is constipation predominant IBS, while Bristol 6 and 7 more than 25%, 1 and 2 less than 25% is diarrhea type. And when mixed means whenever you have more than 25% of Bristol 1 and 2 and more than 25% of 6 and 7, that will be defined as mixed, and unclassified where you cannot be able to classify. So the point of emphasis is 25% of the bowel movement is the threshold for classification, and the dominant type should be more than 25%. Basically, it is important for us to treat the patient depending upon the constipation and the diarrhea, and the drugs are divided according to the constipation and diarrhea predominant IBS. But in clinical practice, sometimes it's very difficult to put the patient in one category, and the patient switches from functional constipation to mixed constipation or functional diarrhea to mixed constipation, and there the bloating and distension, especially in Indian population, around 50 to 60% of these patients have bloating and distension as a predominant symptom. So basically, it's a continuum of the disease where the disease varies in spectrum from one to other, but rarely shifts from constipation to diarrhea. Now, what is the normal bowel frequency in India? This was the IBS task force, the findings of which have been published in Indian Journal of Gastroenterology 2008. We were the part of task force, and where the subjects from community were tested. In around 4,500 subjects from community, it was found that majority of the people say that they would go for once or twice time. That is, 1 or 2 times a day is considered as a normal bowel frequency in Indian subcontinent in majority of the people in the population survey done by the ISG task force. So, now let us see what are the new factors in the pathophysiology. The earlier concept was altered GI motility, visceral hypersensitivity, psychosomatic factors. These three were the important factors which would explain the pathophysiology of IBS. Now, what we have is now new things. There is a role of bacteria, so there is a dysbiosis. Dysbiosis results in gut mucosal immune activation and the increased intestinal permeability. So, the new factors which have been proposed in the pathophysiology of irritable bowel syndrome is dysbiosis, increased permeability, and immune activation. Earlier it was said that this is a psychosomatic disorder, but nowadays more and more evidence is towards role of bacteria, inflammation, leaky gut, or altered permeability together with visceral hypersensitivity. So, this is one of the studies which was presented in DDW by Dr. Uday Ghoshal, who has done a lot of work on IBS in Indian subcontinent. And what he has done was to select 3 groups of patients: IBS with diarrhea, 30 patients, 28 patients with ulcerative colitis who was on remission, and 25 healthy controls. And what he looked at were 3 parameters: fecal calprotectin, suggestive of inflammatory activity, gut permeability test, and a colonic biopsy and histopathology was done. So the results of this study suggested that patients with IBS diarrhea and ulcerative colitis in remission had more fecal calprotectin than healthy controls. They had more impaired lactulose breath test, lactulose mannitol ratio, and the more histopathological changes suggestive of inflammation and cryptitis was seen in around 66% of IBS diarrhea as against 20% of controls. So suggesting that many of these patients would have inflammation in the colonic biopsies. I'll be mainly discussing with you about these guidelines which have been proposed very recently And these guidelines, Canadian Association guidelines, which have come very recently in January 2019 in the Journal of Canadian Association of Gastroenterology, and I'll be discussing about a guideline by American College of Gastroenterology for the management of IBS, which has come very recently in 2018. So these are the recent guidelines. So now, what diagnostic test should be done in patients with IBS? Now, the guidelines suggest that we suggest IBS patient to have serological testing to exclude celiac disease. So celiac disease testing should be done in these patients. We will see the importance subsequently. The guidelines do not recommend testing of CRP, fecal calprotectin, colonoscopy below the age of 50 years, colonoscopy below the age of 50 years with alarm symptoms routinely unless the clinician suspects that the patient has something. But colonoscopy is recommended if the patient has IBS symptoms more than 50 years of age, short onset of symptoms. One must do the colonoscopy. We recommend against IBS patient having a food allergy testing, lactogen hydrogen breath test, glucose hydrogen breath test. So basically summarizing, I would say that apart from routine investigations like hemogram, thyroid, blood sugar, and the other routine liver function test, I think excluding celiac disease is a very important thing when you have a patient with altered bowels. Colonoscopy should be reserved for patients, those who have alarm symptoms, number one, or they are elderly and they have short history after 50 years. So first let us come to the statement number one. We suggest IBS patients to have serological testing to exclude celiac disease. Why this is so? Because symptoms of celiac disease mimic that of irritable bowel syndrome. Number one, the prevalence of celiac disease in patients with irritable bowel syndrome is more than normal control population. So it is better to get their tissue TTG and endomysial antibody and maybe D2 biopsy when we do endoscopy when these patients come to you. So the bottom line is exclude celiac disease. Whenever you have doubt, diagnostic investigations should be done, especially when the patient has alarm symptoms. So when the patient says that he has altered bowels and abdominal pain after the age of 50, or the patient has alarm symptoms in the form of GI bleeding, iron deficiency anemia, nocturnal diarrhea, weight loss, family history of colorectal cancer, IBD, these patients, I think we should be investigating. The guidelines suggest you that you should be doing it as a group, but in an individual patient, if you feel that this patient has abdominal lump or a GI bleeding, he has alarm symptoms, I feel that this is organic disease, the colonoscopy has to be done. Now, let us come to the management of these patients, exercise, diet, and dietary manipulation. There are hardly any trials of exercise and irritable bowel syndrome, and they are, whosoever trials are there, they are of low quality. So I will take exercise in next few slides. Dietary manipulation, a low FODMAP diet for overall symptomatic improvement in IBS patient is recommended, we suggest against a gluten-free diet or a exclusion diet based on the antibody and leukocyte activation test for all or improvement of IBS symptoms. So there is lot of literature or low FODMAP diet which will be seen in the subsequent slides. I happen to see one of the journals and article where it has been compared, walking exercise was compared to yoga, and it was found that which is better in clinical practice in patients with irritable bowel syndrome. The 90% of the participants believed that yoga is better before the start of this study. 90% were believed that yoga is better for walking, but the conclusion of this study was that at the end of 4 months, when the analysis was done, probably walking had an edge over yoga, and the walking continued beyond 4 months in many patients, those who were doing it regularly as compared to yoga. Yoga help in more improvement in abdominal symptoms and more improvement in visceral sensitivity, while the overall walking relate to more of mood elevator and overall GI symptoms. So, I mean, these are the few trials which are there in the literature, but not strong evidence-based trial to recommend about their use. We have been treating IBS with fiber, and this is going on for ages. Now, what is the evidence in the literature? We have two types of fiber, a soluble fiber and the insoluble fiber. So, all the recommendations are for the psyllium, that is isabgol husk, but not for wheat bran, for overall symptomatic improvement. So if you want to use fiber, it should be isabgol which should be used, and that is helpful in patients with irritable bowel syndrome over wheat bran. Now, what are FODMAP diet? Now, you start with F. F is fermentable, O is oligo, D is di, M is monosaccharides, and polyols. So, these are the short chain carbohydrates. These carbohydrates, when they go into the gut unabsorbed, they are acted upon by the bacteria in the gut, and that results in the production of hydrogen, methane, and other gases, and which are responsible for fermentation and resulting in abdominal distension and increased GI motility, secretion, and diarrhea. So, now what are the fructose containing? Honey, apple, pears, dried fruit, mangoes, fruit juices. Fructans containing wheat, rye, barley, onion, lactose containing milk and milk products. Sorbitol containing apricot, peaches, gums. Raffinose containing all leafy vegetable, cabbage, green peas, legumes, lentils. So all good things you have to stop. So this is to tell you what is high FODMAP diet. So summarizing, I will tell you milk and milk products, wheat, rye, barley, green and leafy vegetables, fruits which are having skin like grapes, guava, papaya, watermelon, then the onion and garlic. These are the things which you should avoid, and go for what are the diets which are low FODMAP diet, which are given below. Now, what is the evidence in the literature? I would draw your attention to this meta-analysis of low FODMAP diet versus a traditional IBS diet published in Nutrients 2017 very recently, where the 4 parameters have been compared, and the low FODMAP diet has been found to be significantly better in reducing abdominal pain, bloating. As you can see that the graph is away from one, and the better towards the FODMAP diet as compared to traditional diet. However, there was not much change as far as stool consistency and the stool frequency was concerned. So, summarizing, I will tell you that low FODMAP diet was associated with improvement in abdominal pain and bloating, to some extent the consistency of motion. We suggest offering IBS patient antispasmodics for their abdominal pain. Now, it's a common question asked that what is the evidence and which antispasmodic to use. As you can go through this busy slide, I will just highlight, you can see in the red number that these all trials have been done earlier, and the number of patients which are included in the trial are majority of the times in two figures. But the whatever meta-analysis of these trials suggest that the antispasmodics are definitely better in relieving pain as compared to placebo in patients with IBS. Majority of the times, the number needed to treat are 4. There is nothing to choose between different antispasmodics. Dicyclomine, Hyoscine, Otilium bromide, Pinavarine bromide, all these things are used. Anticholinergics are supposed to be better than calcium channel blockers like mebeverine and other drugs. So, what I mean is the anticholinergics should be preferred over the calcium channel blocker. In fact, peppermint oil also, there is a evidence of literature that it is helping in reducing abdominal pain. So, these are the forest plot published in BMJ, and you can see that the various drugs like otilium bromide and all drugs have been there which are found to be useful. As you can say that the diamond is shifting towards the left side, suggesting that majority of the drugs are useful, and the right hand chart are the calcium channel blockers where the shift is not that much seen. How about peppermint oil? This is a new kid in the block. We have not used it in significant number of patients, but we suggest offering IBS patients peppermint oil to improve IBS symptoms. And the meta-analysis of various trials have shown a benefit in terms of favoring peppermint oil in reducing abdominal symptoms. And the most abdominal symptoms reduced is abdominal pain. It can be used for any type of IBS, constipation, diarrhea type of IBS. The only disadvantage of peppermint oil is the bad menthol smell which it comes, but with the encapsulated formulations, these dyspeptic symptoms or a bad smell has been found to be not that common. What is the differential diagnosis of IBS? So, apart from colonic malignancy, inflammatory bowel disease, which are common in clinical practice, the various differential diagnoses which needs to be excluded are celiac disease, which we know. Then there is an entity which is called as non-celiac wheat intolerance. The patient does not have celiac disease but cannot tolerate wheat and get symptoms of flatulence, diarrhea, which is called as NCWD. non-celiac gluten intron, NCGI. Then there is a food allergy, disaccharide lactase deficiency, bile acid diarrhea, microscopic colitis, and the most important is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We see many patients, those who have small intestinal diverticulum, they would present to you with recurrent episodes of diarrhea, but these diarrheas are episodic diarrheas and they are being wrongly labeled as irritable bowel syndrome. So, if you have a patient who is not responding to routine treatment, it is mandatory that you must get their investigations to find out whether the patient has organic disease. So, the common ones differentials are malignancy, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, SIBO. Now, what are the therapeutic targets? You have anti-serotonergic drugs. Now, you know that 5-hydroxytryptamine has an important role to play in GI motility. The excessive 5-hydroxytryptamine increases the motility of the gut, leading to diarrhea. Less 5-hydroxytryptamine leads to constipation. So, anti-serotonergic drugs which are acting on the 5-HT4 receptors or 5-HT3 receptors are the important drugs. Alocetrol, cilancetrol, ramocetrol, ondansetron are the group of drugs. Anti-motility drugs, like drugs which are acting mainly on the opioid receptors, like loperamide, diphenoxylate, elaxidolene are the important drugs. Then you have diet, elimination diet, the low FODMAP diet as we discussed. Then you have bile acids. Bile acids supposed to be mainly in post-cholecystectomy patients. Then they have bile acids supposed to be important etiological factor in the pathogenesis of irritable bowel syndrome. And cholestyramine, cholestyramine, and cholesevelum are the drugs we will be seeing their efficacy. Altering microbiota of the gut by either rifaximin probiotic or fecal microbial transplant, inflammatory cell and anti-inflammatory agents in the form of mesalamine and mast cell stabilizers are the potential therapeutic targets in IBS. Now, how about the use of pre-probiotics in the patients with irritable bowel syndrome? We suggest against the use of probiotics and prebiotics for overall symptom improvement IBS patient are the American guidelines. However, a year after, the Canadian guidelines suggest that we suggest use of probiotic taken as a group to improve global symptoms as well as bloating and flatulence in IBS patients. So these statements are contradictory. One is favoring, Canadian is favoring, American is saying that there is no role. So probably I think with the addition of few of the trials in the last 1 year, the meta-analysis has confirmed that the probiotics are found to be beneficial. However, whatever benefit is observed with probiotic is not very significant, but the whatever benefit is there, the relative risk of not improving is 0.81 with probiotics, which is with a statistical significance. So probiotics should be tried, particularly in diarrhea predominant IBS. However, which probiotic to be used? Now there are individual trials, Lactobacillus, Saccharomyces, Bifidobacter, Escherichia, and all these trials, none of them have found individually have found to be beneficial. The message is that the combination of treatment is supposed to be better than individual drug. Combination of therapy is better than individual drug, and it has to be given for a short period of 8 weeks. Ranju. We suggest against offering diarrhea predominant IBS patient continuous loperamide use to improve IBS symptoms. So loperamide should not be used in patients on a regular basis. The loperamide helps in reducing the bowel frequency, but it does not help in reducing the global symptoms of IBS. It does not help in reducing the bowel abdominal pain in these patients. And whatever trials are there, they are of very small number of patients, not very well organized trials. So the evidence is against using loperamide continuously in patients with diarrhea predominant IBS. However, to reduce the frequency for a patient to travel outside, loperamide can be given as a treatment. Now, what do you have as a drug in irritable bowel syndrome? Romesetron. Romesetron, a drug which has a most promising drug which is there in irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea. This is one study published in Gastroenterology 2016 where romesetron reduces symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea and improves the quality of life in women. So this is the study which is conducted in women with 500 and odd patients, and as you can see month-wise that the long-lasting effect of romesetron was seen for a period of 12 weeks. Romesetron has been shown to be the most promising H3 antagonist in treating IBS diarrhea regardless of the sex, because subsequently another trial has shown efficacy of romesetron in irritable bowel syndrome in males in Japan. So it can be used for either sex, and the only thing, the dose in females is 2.5 microgram as against 5 microgram in male. This drug is 5-HT3 antagonist. Now, how about rifaximin for irritable bowel syndrome? I think majority of you are aware of the trials, Target 1 and Target 2 trials, which have been very well conducted, published in New England Journal of Medicine. Patients who have irritable bowel syndrome without constipation, that means the patient had diarrhea or they were mixed patients. These patients were given a rifaximin dose 550 3 times a day as compared to placebo and were followed up for 12 weeks. And rifaximin patients 623 in Target 1 and 637 in Target 2. So more than 1,000 patients, and both have shown a significant increase in total global relief of IBS symptoms. Now, what is the global relief of IBS symptoms? If you have abdominal pain, if you have loose motions, 50% of reduction in the symptoms is supposed to be a global improvement in IBS symptoms. So, the rifaximin has shown a 10% benefit in these patients. So, this was the Target 1 and Target 2, which we already suggested. And as you can see, the advantage was 40.8 got better as compared to 31.2% in placebo, same in target 2. So combined average 10% advantage over placebo. And apart from adequate relief of global IBS symptoms, the important symptom which got better was bloating in these two trials. That was the secondary endpoint of this treatment. Now, can we have a patients of irritable bowel syndrome will come again and again. So, what is the evidence in the literature of trying these drugs on the first and second retreatment? Those patients, those who have responded in target 1 and 2, when they had recurrent symptoms after some time, the first and the second retreatment was also associated with similar results of benefit, and the bacterial resistance and other organisms, development of superadded organisms was not seen after repeated treatment. Ilixadoline is a opioid receptor agonist. It has a effect in diarrhea predominant IBS, and this has been again tried in a very well designed trials in more than 2,000 patients of irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea and showing the benefit. Now, how does this act? This has got three, opoid has three receptors, mu receptors, kappa receptors and delta. Now, this drug is a mu and kappa agonist and delta antagonist, and thereby it increases the secretion of the gut, regulates the motility and visceral sensation, reduces the visceral hypersensitivity and improves the gut motility. Now, these are the two trials, one for 6 months, another conducted for ilixadeline given in the dose of 75 milligram twice a day or 100 milligram twice a day. This drug is of course not available in India, but maybe the pharma company will launch it very shortly. And it has been shown that when this drug was given for a period of 6 months, efficacy was found to be sustained and around 10% benefit, I would say, with as compared to placebo. So ilixadoline in the dose of 7500 milligram twice a day should be also one of the options for diarrhea predominant IBS. Now we have finished diarrhea predominant IBS, and so we started with probiotic, we started with low FODMAP diet, probiotics, rifaximin, and now then after we have seen anticholinergics, now we see the constipation predominant IBS, and here you have many new molecules, but unfortunately they are not available in India, like linaclotide, plecanatide, lubiprostol is available but sometimes is not available, bisacodyne, polyethylene glycol, fiber and bulking agents, and you have antidepressants like SSRI. So, what is the evidence of the most common drug which you use in clinical practice is polyethylene glycol. What is the evidence of polyethylene glycol for IBS constipation? Unfortunately, the spontaneous bowel movement is better. However, the abdominal pain and discomfort does not get better with polyethylene glycol. And the concept in IBS is improvement in the total global symptoms of IBS, like abdominal pain, discomfort, apart from bowel movements. So, this helps constipation but no abdominal pain. But since there are no drugs, not many drugs which are available, the people start using this drug. the polyethylene glycol in constipation predominant IBS. We suggest offering constipation predominant IBS patient lubiprostol to improve the IBS symptoms. Now, what is the evidence in the literature? Lubiprostol has been tried in 8 microgram BD, and the total number of patients are around more than 400-500, and it has been shown that there is a 10%, 8 to 10% benefit over placebo, and the response lasts longer. So lubiprostol significantly improves abdominal pain and bloating apart from constipation. Linaclotide, these drugs are strongly recommended to improve IBS, constipation predominant IBS. There is a strong evidence. Now, what is linaclotide? Linaclotide is a 14 amino acid peptide which acts on the cyclic GMP. Cyclic GMP through enzymes guanylate cyclate. So the linaclotide stimulates guanylate cyclase, which leads to increased cyclic GMP, and this cyclic GMP has two activities. One, it leads to increased secretions of the fluid in the intestine, and also it acts on the afferent nerve fibers and mediate the visceral analgesia. So it acts by these two activity, and linaclotide significantly improves the abdominal pain and bowel symptoms associated with constipation with an advantage of around 20%. 290 micrograms of linaclotide significantly improves abdominal pain and bloating in patients with IBS constipation. Similar results have been obtained with plecanatide 3 milligram and 6 milligram with not much of difference between the two doses, but significantly both the doses better than placebo. You will be remembering Tagaserod, which was used for constipation predominant IBS and was withdrawn from the market because of the cardiac side effects. Now, again, there is a trial which is published in last DDW where it is shown that a Tagaserod for IBS patient helped the female patients with no history of cardiovascular disease should be tried, and the preliminary trials have shown significant benefit of Tagaserod. So, of course, this is not available in India. So what are the therapies for this thing, constipation? Psyllium offers modest clinical benefits, so isabgol is used. PEG improves constipation but no abdominal pain or bloating. High quality evidence supports the use of lubiprostol, linaclotide, plecanatide with constipation predominant IBS. How about antidepressant and SSRI? Antidepressants and tricyclic antidepressant and SSRI have been found to be beneficial in patients with IBS, and they have been recommended. Now, a meta-analysis of 16 RCT suggests that the benefit is there with antidepressants, with number needed to treat are around 4. And there are two types of antidepressants. One is tricyclic antidepressants, which are the best studied antidepressants, and the patient, if has diarrhea predominant IBS, you must use tricyclic antidepressant because they have anticholinergic effect. But if you have a constipation predominant IBS, you should use SSRIs, which are likely to increase the which do not have so many anticholinergic effect. So basically, amitriptyline are the common tricyclic antidepressant, and the escitalopram are the common SSRI which are used in clinical practice. As we have discussed earlier, that there is a role of inflammation and the intestinal mast cells in patients with IBS diarrhea. So, what is the role of ketotifen on abdominal symptoms, visceral sensitivity? And this preliminary trials has shown, this is a phase 2 trial, that 78% patients have showed improvement with ketotifen as compared to 35% with placebo, again published in, again presented in DDW last year. So, I mean, this would be a promising drug, would need to be treated for in the long-term trials with large number of patients. Now, everywhere there is a fecal microbial transplant. So, what is the evidence in the literature for fecal microbial transplant in patients with irritable bowel syndrome? So, this is the first randomized control trial which has been published in Lancet Gastroenterology Hepatology 2017, which suggests a benefit of fecal microbial transplant as compared to placebo for the patients with moderate to severe irritable bowel syndrome. And the fecal transplant was done with the fresh sample, and this trial had shown significant benefit in patients with severe symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. However, a meta-analysis which was published subsequently has negated the studies, suggesting, as you can see here, that the diamond is right in the center, suggesting that there is no benefit, and the benefit of FMT in irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea, and the FDA has not recommended it unless for study purpose. Now, what are the other important measures? I think very important is a doctor-patient relationship, which should be very important, that the patient has to spend time with the doctor, has to spend time with the patient, assure the patient, understand his problem, and this is very important in psychosomatic disorders like irritable bowel syndrome. There are various therapies like psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, cognitive behavior therapy, out of which cognitive behavior therapy is very important and has shown to be in clinical trials a beneficial therapy. Now let me summarize for you the various. Now, when the patients with irritable bowel syndrome do the celiac serology, apart from routine tests like hemogram, thyroid, B12, sugar, liver function test, so do the celiac serology as a blood test. Colonoscopy, it's your discretion. Patients beyond 50 years, alarm symptoms, colonoscopy should be done. There is evidence of soluble fiber. So patients, isabgol is probably the first line of treatment. Pain, predominant IBS, peppermint oil should be used apart from antispasmodics, and then focus on the predominant bowel habit. If the patient has diarrhea, start with low FODMAP diet, probiotic, tricyclic antidepressant, elixadeline is not available, and then CBT and hypnotherapy. I would like to add here rifaximin in diarrhea predominant IBS. While if the patient has constipation, again start with isabgol. Probably you have lubiprostol as the evidence-based medicine. Polyethylene glycol is not recommended, but since we do not have medicines like linaclotide or plecanatide, we may use it in constipation predominant IBS. CBT and hypnotherapy is recommended. And in mixed type or unclassified type of IBS, low FODMAP diet, probiotic, tricyclic antidepressant, CBT should be done. Now, when you have a bloating as a symptom, you have 3 or 4 things which are working. One is the pre and probiotic, rifaximin, and the low FODMAP diet, very important. And the patient has bloating as a predominant symptom. In Indian patients, 60 to 70% of IBS patients have bloating as a predominant symptom. Lubiprostol is also associated with significant relief in bloating as a sensation. So also the rifaximin. Not recommended treatment, gluten-free diet, bran, herbal medicines, acupuncture. These are not recommended treatment for irritable bowel syndrome. Thank you. We can go to the questions now. Ranju, Pushkala bolo. Ranju, Are. I will take questions one by one. Let me start with the first page. Dr. K.L. Namdev Nan. Vijay Vargiya, best for knowledge uptake, interesting. अरे पुष्करला बोलो ना, रंजू पुष्कर. We go on to the page 2. How we differentiate between IBS from tuberculosis intestine? Well, basically, tuberculosis of the intestine is organic disease. It can involve the small and large bowel. Tuberculosis is associated with fever, weight loss, bleeding PR. These are the common symptoms which you have. In irritable bowel syndrome, all these things are not there. Both are chronic diseases. There are so many comments that you cannot see the webcast, the sound is not coming, the voice is low. Good talk, I have not been able to follow it. Anyway, so I'll just see what are the important questions. Can probiotic as a long-term basis being given in IBS? I think we have discussed this earlier also, that the majority of the times the probiotics are given for a period of 2 months, and it can be given for long term, but then the evidence is not there. Can rifaximin and probiotic given at the same time? This is a question from Shashikumar Thapa. Rifaximin, it's better to give rifaximin and probiotic in a sequential manner. 15 days of rifaximin and probably 15 days of probiotic followed by. So rather than simultaneous, sequential is better. Is peppermint oil helpful? If yes, then in constipation predominant or diarrhea based? Basically, peppermint oil is used mainly for pain in IBS rather than diarrhea and constipation predominant IBS. Shri Mandir Kumar, is the IBS diagnosed by ruling out other organic causes, or can fecal calprotectin test, whether it is done in all the labs, how much it will cost? I think fecal calprotectin is a simple test, and by and large, usually it is used in pediatric population, those patients who have altered bowel habits. So if we have altered bowel habits in pediatric, they should not be submitted for, it's difficult to submit them for procedures like colonoscopy, endoscopy and all. So fecal calprotectin is one of the tests used in pediatric practice to differentiate between irritable bowel syndrome. But fecal calprotectin would only suggest inflammation. So any infective diarrhea, the calprotectin can be positive. It's not done in all the labs because there are very few labs which are doing it, and the cost is also, I think, around in the private practice it would cost about 1500 to 2000 rupees. What is the role of probiotic? I think we have discussed this. Sir, what this question from Nilesh Kumar Pawar, that what do you suggest a diet in IBS patient with diabetic, hypertensive and diabetic nephropathy? I mean, nothing special. You have to suggest them a low FODMAP diet initially for a period of 2 months, together with things like diet for diabetes and hypertension. Role of SSRI in IBS. I think this also we have discussed, that SSRI are mainly used for in all forms of IBS, but predominantly it should be used in constipation predominant IBS because they hardly have any anticholinergic effect as compared to tricyclic antidepressants. So normally the antidepressant dose of amitriptyline is say 25 microgram. So the amitriptyline, tricyclic antidepressant dose has to be changed in irritable bowel syndrome from 25 to 10. 25 milligram is a antidepressant dose, while 10 milligram is a visceral analgesic dose. Same is not holding true for SSRI, where the dose remains same. So escitalopram should be given in the same dose as given. This is the question from Vikas from Nagpur. Now we go on to the next page, page 4. What type of regular drug regimen you will advise for the patient with diabetic gastroparesis and abdominal pain? Drug regimen. There are trials of diabetic gastroparesis. Patients with diabetic gastroparesis can present with abdominal pain and vomiting, and the drugs which are useful for diabetic gastroparesis are the promotility drugs which are used in clinical practice. There is a role of erythromycin which is used in these patients. Erythromycin is acting as a promotility, and now endoscopic treatment has been suggested that these patients should undergo a GPOM type of treatment. Similarly, implant the gastric pacemaker can be also instilled in these patients, diabetic gastroparesis with abdominal pain. Will over-the-counter available Eno-Gas O-Fast relieve acute postpartial meal bloating? I think what it does is that with the Eno, you have more effervescent, the gas is produced, and the patient has the sensation that the gas is coming out of the mouth. So I don't think that those are all evidence-based medicines, and they are just for symptomatic relief without any scientific evidence for it to there. Dr. Manoj Agrawal, how can you differentiate SIBO with IBS? Good question. SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and SIBO in clinical practice is not uncommon, I would say. Any patient who is taking acidity medicine, any patient who is diabetic, any patient who has B12 and deficiency anemia, MCV raised, all these with diarrhea can have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So any patient with altered bowels, if he has recurrent diarrhea, watery diarrhea, episodic diarrhea associated with organic features like anemia, weight loss, nocturnal diarrhea, all these patients should be investigated for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Again, a question from Vikas Nagpur. Racecadotril has any role in IBS? I am not aware of any trials of racecadotril in patients with IBS, but the similar mechanism, opioid, it's like a opioid agonist. So by helping the opioid agonist it prevents diarrhea. Question from Dr. A. Zaman, Bengal. Which sex are more affected in IBS? Globally, it has been seen that the IBS is more common in female patients, but the results of the Indian Task Force, which are published in Indian Journal of Gastroenterology, suggest that 2/3 of the patients are male in IBS patient, because in Indian subcontinent more males they attend the clinic, and probably the females, it's not that they don't have the disease, but they don't get the medical facility. That was possibly the reason why the more males are there. What is the duration of rifaximin therapy? Mainly in the clinical trials, it has to be used for short duration of 2 weeks, 550 milligram 3 times a day, and then followed by some gap interval, and in case of recurrent symptoms you can repeat the doses. Dr. Jatin Yegurla, what is the order in which the drug should be tried for each subtype? What are the first line? What should be kept in mind while choosing the drug? I think I have told you this, that I think you start with Isabgol as a plain drug which you've been using, and if you have you can refer to the last chart of the drug which suggests that if you have a constipation predominant IBS, you try Isabgol, then give maybe lubiprostol, and that does not work, then you have polyethylene glycol, that does not work, then there are new drugs like prucalopride and plecanapide. So these are not available here. With diarrhea predominant IBS, but I think we should start with low FODMAP diet. You can give, the choices are different. You can give probiotic, you can give rifaximin, you can give elixadoline, but which is not available. Can rifaximin probiotic given together? This is already answered. It should be better to give it. What is the dose of duration of amitriptyline and escitalopram? The dose I already told, the amitriptyline a dose of 10 milligram, escitalopram in the regular dose over a period of 6 months. Duration, the duration of therapy, we basically give it for a period of 6 months. Again, question from Dr. Jatin. Duration doses of common antispasmodic drugs. They have to be given as and when the symptoms occur, because basic idea of the patient is to reduce the abdominal pain. Role of chlordiazepoxide in clydenium bromide. There are no combined trials of this drug. As a anticholinergic, clydenium bromide should be given. There are no trials of combination of chlordiazepoxide and clydenium bromide. What should be the dose and duration of mebeverine in IBS? Dr. Jaiswal. I don't use it very often, but the dose used in one tablet 3 times a day, if I am not wrong, and the duration is for a period of at least couple of months. What is the role of rifaximin for IBS constipation? This is a question from Hilal Ahmad Dhar, Srinagar, Kashmir. I think as you are aware that there are bacteria which produces methane, which are called as methanergic bacteria, and these methanergic bacteria are acted upon by rifaximin. And methane producing bacteria are the ones which are associated with constipation. So, however, to my knowledge, there are not many trials of rifaximin for IBS constipation. So, it's a theoretical advantage. Whether it should be used in clinical practice is a question we can't be answered. Mishra Balasore, what will be precise treatment regime for the patient with symptoms of alternate? I think you have to decide about the alternate constipation and diarrhea patient. I think you have to decide which symptom is more predominant and treat accordingly. And then there are certain drugs like antidepressant, anticholinergics, isabgol, which can be used prebiotic, probiotic. They can be used for both. So that can be used. What CBT means? CBT is a cognitive behavior therapy where the psychotherapist makes you understand and changes your approach to that particular problem. So it's a behavior therapy which is done by a psychologist, and in the clinical practice supposed to be quite beneficial. Polyethylene glycol, do you use in clinical practice? Certainly, because we don't have many drugs. In fact, lubiprostol is also sometimes not available. Duration of treatment to control IBS symptoms. Jitendra Deliwala from Ahmedabad. Long treatment. Majority of the patients, they require long treatment. Nilesh Kumar Pawar, what should include? What includes in low FODMAP diet? I think I already told you that what is low FODMAP diet. Mainly milk and milk products should be avoided. Fruits with skins like apple, grapes, watermelon, pineapple, they should be avoided. Then you should avoid garlic, onion. Those are, then the dry fruits are, I am telling you about the high FODMAP diet. I have shown you the low FODMAP chart, and you can actually go into the net to find out what are the low FODMAP. So foods to be avoided like wheat, barley and rye, they should be avoided. There are so many questions. Is lubiprostol available in India? How was the experience? What are the dose, duration, adverse effects? Lubiprostol is available in India by the name of Lubavil. The doses are 8 microgram twice a day. Patients with constipation predominant IBS. The duration can be given for a period of 3 months to 6 months. The trials have shown long-term benefit effect when it is given for 6 months. What will be your prescription for IBS diarrhea? That is covered. Duration of treatment, long treatment. How long treatment of IBS? Again, long treatment. Is there any permanent cure for IBS? I don't think so. Basically, it has been said that the post-infectious IBS diarrhea is supposed to be better than IBS, because 50% of these patients, when they are followed up for long term at the 5 to 6 years, they get better with their in their illness, as compared to 20% of patients with IBS otherwise. So post-infectious IBS have a better long-term prognosis as compared to IBS alone. Which antispasmodics we can use and how long? There is nothing to choose between the antispasmodics. Basically, there is nothing to choose between the antispasmodics. You can choose whatever, because there are no head-to-head trials. But as I was saying, dicyclomine, Hyoscyamax, Otilium bromide, Pinavirian bromide, Drotin, all these are used as antispasmodics. What food should be avoided in IBS? I already told you. When to suspect SIBO, that has also been discussed. How to differentiate food allergy from IBS diarrhea? By and large, food allergy is immunologically mediated, allergic mediated, while IBS, there is no food intolerance may be there. So intolerance and allergy are different. Allergy is immunological mediated, IgE takes a part. Food intolerance can be because of additives, because of fermentation of the food itself, leading to bacterial production. How long do you try one particular medicine any patient? There are no strict rules of how long to try, because basically, like rifaximin is given only for a short period of time, while the antidepressants are given for a long period of time of 6 months. Lubiprostol is given for a period of 6 months. The other drugs like probiotics are given for a period of 2 months. Because the patients, sometimes you have to decide about the patient's symptoms and go into the basic cause. The patient has psychological problems, he needs to be treated. The next question, how many cases of IBS are associated with psychiatric illness? In my practice, around 1/3 of the patients would need psychiatric consultation. I decide in a way that if the patient has more dominant IBS symptoms like anxiety, depression, they should be referred to a psychiatrist. If they have more abdominal symptoms, then I treat it. But if the depression, anxiety, somatization is more, then one can refer the patient to psychiatrist. Does fasting have any effect on IBS therapy? Not aware. Can we again see this webinar later? We already, this is the second time which I have done it, so may not be possible again, but you can ask the torrent people. Between SSRI and SNRI, which is the most preferred treatment of IBS constipation, SNRI, not many trials have been there in the clinical practice. SSRI are probably the well-tried drugs. So I would prefer the well-tried drugs as compared to SNRI. Is there any relation between IBS and OCD? I think part of these patients can have OCD. What is the treatment of infantile IBS? Not very common in children or infants. Majority of these people, infants, have exaggerated gastrocolic reflux than IBS. they are not in a position to tell whether they have abdominal pain. And majority of the times they have been seen by pediatrician, the lactose intolerance, milk allergy the problems are more common than IBS. IBS in pregnancy and management. I am not aware of the drugs which should not be used in pregnancy, but I feel that rifaximin, I feel that probiotics are safe in pregnancy, isabgol is safe in pregnancy, anticholinergics are also routinely used, like otilimum bromide is very safe in pregnancy. Antidepressants, all the antipsychotic antidepressants should be avoided in pregnancy, and I am not aware of the new drugs. In fact, I would like to refer to the literature to answer this question of pregnancy and IBS. How long treatment of IBS continued in symptomatically better patient? I mean, you have to base the treatment depending upon the patient's symptoms. If the patient is symptomatically better, then the treatment can be stopped unless patient has depression, anxiety, which needs the basic focus. So if the patient has anxiety and depression, they need to be treated over a long term. Which probiotic preparations are used commonly and what are the other indications? PSL3, Providac. I think the combination of probiotics is better, and you can use any of the combinations which are there. The probiotic which are enriched in lactobacillus and bifidobacter, they are the ones which are better, because it has been shown in irritable bowel syndrome that there is a deficiency of lactobacillus and bifidobacter. Can probiotic be helpful? Mainly in diarrhea predominant IBS, not in constipation predominant IBS. Role of prucalopride in IBS. I think Virendra Kumar Taneja from Jabalpur. Prucalopride, there are not many trials of prucalopride in irritable bowel syndrome, but it has been seen that prucalopride leads to better bowel movement, but no significant improvement in abdominal pain. But unfortunately, there are no many trials of this drug. I think there are so many questions, difficult to answer. Now I take a leave and thank you very much for attending this program. I would come to you again with some different topic, which I will let you know in subsequent 1 week. But I must appreciate and your patience listening to this talk, and your so many queries made me happy that this talk might be useful in your clinical practice. Thank you so much.